And welcome to part 2 of Foundry Essentials, Introduction to the Foundry. Today we're going to talk more about map making, because building your maps really is the first step in building a mission. So here we are on a map that I've already built, and I did this because, well, I was having fun building it, and I also wanted to show you what you're capable of creating in the Foundry just using one prop. So this map is basically one prop. It's a board cube, and there's a cube underneath me and a cube beside me, and over here and up above. And what I've been trying to do is build a Borg interior out of board cubes. So let me show you what I've made so far. Let's go to Impulse. And again, this is all just from the use of one prop strategically placed on the map. And that's enough that I need to show you. Let me show you what it looks like from the top down. Here's my map, just a bunch of board cubes, and I built this really long, elaborate tunnel race through board cubes. There's a little bit of stuff to make it more than just board cubes. But for the most part, it's just a bunch of board cubes I've put together in strategic locations, all to make a space map. And here's what it looks like in the Foundry. So you can see all these little board cubes. Some are made for the walls, others are put up for the ceilings, and they all form a tunnel that goes through. And despite how complicated this may look, or you may be thinking, my God, how long did it take you to put those together? It really wasn't that hard. I mean, once you really understand how to build your maps and how to put objects on your map, and especially how to copy and paste objects, then it gets really easy. So really what I did is I started out and I built this part, and then I built this part, and then I just copied the whole thing, pasted it, turned it around to do a different part of the tunnel here. Then I copied and pasted the whole thing and made it into a longer tunnel by pasting it here. And eventually I got to the point where I think I had made basically this whole part of the tunnel. I copied, pasted a second version of it, turned it around, and used it to make the second half of the tunnel. So all in all, it took me, probably about an hour and a half to make this big elaborate set. But the reason that I've gotten so efficient at doing this is because I've really dived into understanding how to be a builder. And there are different types of Foundry authors. Some don't really like to customize sets, others really like customizing NPCs, and then there are others, most famously Alamac 30, who are just builders, and they build and they build and they build. I like to do it. We'll see how you like to do it, but I'll teach you some of the basics about being a builder in the hopes that you'll mess around with it. So let's start with a new map. Create a map. We'll just create a space map. We'll use, let's just do a custom map so there's nothing else on the map. You must specify a map name. Okay, space map. Okay, and here is our map. We can use the mouse wheel to zoom out. Use the mouse wheel to zoom back in. If we want a better look, we can pull some of these tabs down, or we can get rid of some stuff that we don't want, or pull it back. Up here in the UI, when you first create your maps, these will be set to visible, meaning that this little icon here will be green, and this little icon will be white, and then this little icon will be yellow. I should explain what they are. The first is called View Mission Waypoint. Well, let's not worry about that one. The second one is Enable Translation Snap to Grid. The other one is Enable Rotation Snap to Angle. Basically, think about this as, well, obviously we have a grid here. And so if this icon is up, then when you try to go to details, and let's just search for a board cube. Okay, there's a cube. If this option's on, which is snap to grid, and we put a board cube on the map, it will snap to a specific location on the grid. And let's say you want to move it just a bit, well, it will move just a bit, but it'll snap to a new location on the grid. It's handy sometimes, but other times it can kind of mess you up. And it's the same way with the snap to angle. You can adjust the angle and it will snap to a preconceived angle in the grid. If you try to edit the angle, you try to change it. See, here's rotation angle right here, and it's at 57 degrees. Let's just try to make it just a plain 59, and it changes to 60. If we try to make it 61, it changes back to 60. So it automatically shifts the object to a predetermined angle on the grid. This can be handy if you're trying to line stuff up, but for the most part, most people I know, the first thing they do when they get into the Foundry and they want to build is they turn these things off. And the reason is most experienced authors, I believe, really build their sets by manually editing the X, Y, and Z values. And I know that sounds complicated, but let's go through this and I'll see if I can make you understand. Let's just put this at a 0 angle, so it's a block on a map, and this is again a top-down view of the cube. You have this category here called position, and the first set of numbers is called the X value. And imagine that X is a line from left to right. If you go up on the X, like +2, the cube moves to the left. If you go down the X, say to 0, it goes to, it goes to the left. The other one goes to the right. There's also an absolute 0 on the map, so if you go further down the X, say a -5, it goes further to the left. But if you go back up the X, it goes to the right. And this last set of numbers is similar, but it's the Z coordinates, and Z goes from top to bottom. So the first set goes from left to right, the last set goes from top to bottom. So if I put it just at 0, it moves here. If I go up the Z to +5, it goes there. If I go down the Z to -5, it goes there. This middle number is your Y value. And I want you to notice what happens when I change the Y value on the map. Let's say we go 5 to the Y. Well, nothing happens because the Y value is the altitude of the object, and we're looking down, straight down on the object on a two-dimensional representation of the map. So what I've done with the Y box is I've moved it higher up in the air. So if I spawn here, it will be higher above me if I'm up 5 on the Y, but if I go down 5 on the Y, it will be below me. So I hope that makes sense. Now, the more and more you really understand how to manually edit the X, the easier it becomes to build your map. So let's just start, and we'll put the board cube at 0, 0, 0. Just get one right in the center. And let's say I want to build a tunnel. What I'll do is I'll Control C, Control V. There it is. Now, you noticed it just dropped another version of the cube on the map. I don't have really any control over where it lands, so I'm just going to give it the exact same X and Z value as the first one. And now I have two cubes at exactly the same spot. Now, from experience, I know that these cubes are roughly three coordinates apart. So if I move the second one 3, it will be right there. Or if I want to put it on the other side, I'll go -3, and it'll be right there. You'll notice the cube also has dimensions here, 4 by 4 by 4. The dimensions don't match the values of the X and the Z coordinates. They used to a long time ago, before there was a feet to meters debacle. But after that point, the values on the dimensions don't match the values on the X and the Z coordinates. So you kind of have to kind kind of move it around, go in, look, make sure there's no texture overlap, meaning that if there's a spot right here where, say, the cubes overlap, let's say I decided to go -2. Well, if the cubes overlap right here and they're the exact same place, at the exact same place on the Z up and down value, there'll be a spot right here where the map flickers. And one thing you can easily do is just manually, instead of being at 0, I'll be at 0.02. And that takes care of the texture overlap. But otherwise, dealing with this, I know that these are basically 3 apart. So I can Control-C, Control-V, create another one. This one will be 3 up, and I'll have to manually edit the 0 back down to the 0. And this is how I built the entire set, was just maybe I would highlight all the objects at once and Control-Alt, hold those 2 down to deselect the spawn point. Then I would Control-C, Control-V to create another one. Then I could Control-Alt to move all 3 around. Or I could, with all 3, adjust the rotation value to each. Or I could also Control-Alt again and select more objects and manipulate them that way. Or we could go for a further rotation, 60 that way. So if you could see what I'm doing here, I'm not going in and saying, okay, here's my cube, and I want to put a cube here, and I'm not going in and just kind of relying on my instinct to line it up and then put another cube and lining up. It really is, when you come down to it, kind of a repetitive task of messing with coordinates, doing the math, knowing how to manipulate or manually input X, Y, and Z values just in pure forms of geometry, and you can build really elaborate, complicated sets that way, which pull off really good visual effects. Okay, so get in there and mess around with trying to build your first set in space. You'll probably want to put a planet in, and you'll put a few other objects. Really see what kind of details you have in space and also on a ground map. And also remember that the more that you understand what details you have, the more you can know what type of story you can tell. For instance, with this mission, I never would have tried or imagined that I could create a shuttle mission inside a border cube if I hadn't just messed around and messed around with just building these tunnels. Okay, well, I hope that's useful to you guys. Stay tuned for part 3. Okay, see ya.